Graciela, or Gracie Garcia, is a mother of 4 and a popular hairstylist from Hermiston, Oregon. She was last seen on November 8, 2019. On the night of November 9th, Gracie had plans to bring dinner to her 14-year-old son who had been staying at his father's house. She never showed up. Instead, her husband, the boy's stepfather, showed up with the food and said Gracie had already gone to bed. Gracie's son had 2 missed calls from her from around 7 p.m. as well as a text message, and when he tried to return them, the phone went to voicemail. After being unable to contact their mother for 2 days, the children went to the house to try to speak with her. When they got there, her husband, Cuauhtemoc Romero Sanchez, claimed that she went out and never returned home. The state of the home added to their growing concerns. Gracie's car was in the driveway, her purse, clothing, and jewelry were all left in the house. They reported her missing on November 11th, 2019. Police started an investigation and determined there were a few things taken from the house. Gracie's license, passport, and cell phone were all missing. According to the cell phone company, a final ping to Gracie's phone occurred on November 9th at 12:30 a.m. This was at the Umatilla Bridge at the Oregon and Washington border. Police have described Gracie's disappearance as incredibly suspicious. They have questioned her husband due to the fact that his phone was off the entirety of the day that she went missing, and he never filed a missing persons report. That being said, he has cooperated with police. He let them search his home, and he's given multiple blood samples. But there's plenty of speculation that he knows more than he's saying and that he may have had involvement. Also, there's a rumor that he has friends on the police force who may be covering up for him, but again, that is a rumor. You can follow the case details on Twitter by going to @FindGracieLag. And there's also a GoFundMe page called Missing Gracie Garcia from Hermiston, Oregon. The family is raising funds to not only hire a lawyer, but also a private investigator to hopefully make movement on this case. Please consider donating. Gracie Garcia is currently 50 years old, 5 foot 4 inches, and 140 pounds. When she went missing, she had blonde hair. I will be speaking to one of her family members for an upcoming episode of the Murder in the Rain podcast, so I will of course make another video when I get the additional information from her, as well as a little bit of perspective from her point of view. Stay tuned. This is Zachary Porter, and he's been considered missing under suspicious circumstances since July of 2013. Earlier that summer, Zach sold his BMW car to a Craigslist buyer from North Bend, Oregon. The buyer traded him a motorcycle and a few $1,000s. A few weeks later, the buyer reached back out to Zach and said he now had money and he'd like to buy the motorcycle back. Zach agreed to the deal, and on July 23rd, he left his home in McMinnville, Oregon at around 11 a.m. to ride the motorcycle down to North Bend, which was about 4 hours. The plan the pair agreed on was that after Zach rode the bike down to North Bend, the buyer would drive him back home to McMinnville. And to make sure that the plan was followed through on, he left both the title and the riding leathers at his father's house. Once Zach arrived in North Bend, he promptly texted his father to let him know he arrived safely and that he would be home soon. A bit later, he texted a friend to say he did sell the bike and that he'd be back home in a few hours. Zach never arrived home and no one ever saw him again. Police confirmed with the buyer that he did in fact buy the motorcycle back from Zach, but he did not drive him back to McMinnville. The buyer claimed that Zach made alternative plans to meet a friend at the Myrtlewood factory outlet off Highway 101 and that friend was going to drive him back home to McMinnville. And while it's confirmed that Zach did text and call several friends, no one was able to pick him up that day. There were also no sightings of Zach at the Myrtlewood factory outlet. Zach's family believes he would never intentionally abandon his family. He was a devoted stay-at-home dad to a 5-year-old son, and he was the primary caretaker of his disabled mother, and he was best friends with his grandmother who lived with him. In July of 2020, Zachary was officially declared deceased, and it's his family's belief that he was likely murdered. The Department of Justice Missing Indigenous Persons Task Force is now involved in Zachary's case. While no person of interest has been named publicly, this case is very much open and active. Zachary Porter is of Inuit descent and is just under 6 feet tall. He weighs approximately 180 pounds, has brown hair and brown eyes, a scar on his forehead, and 2 small scars on his upper lip. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing jeans, a dark shirt, and dark skateboarding shoes. Today, he'd be 33 years old. If you have any information that could help solve this case, please call the Coos County Sheriff's Office at 541-396-7802. 34-year-old Tonia Renee Stiles went missing on November 18, 2010. She was last seen in her home in Grass Lake, Michigan. Tonia lived there with her 2 children, her boyfriend of 1.5 years, and a male roommate. Tonia's boyfriend, Scott Cassidy, reported her missing and was one of the last people who had seen her. And of course, they had been in an argument the night before. We're unsure of what they argued about, but it's well documented that the two had money issues. Initially a person of interest, Scott was interviewed but never arrested for her disappearance. He was, however, arrested a few days after she went missing for vehicle theft. While he was in jail, he took his own life by hanging himself with a TV cord. Police have nothing solid connecting Scott to Tonia's disappearance, but I will say this, he has a lengthy criminal history. Arrests on both drugs and weapon charges, and he owned multiple guns. So what I hear is he has motive and means, but there's just no evidence. This case remains an open missing persons case. Please share. Danica Diane Childs from Federal Way, Washington has been missing since December 21st, 2007. At the time of her disappearance, she was 17 years old, 5'2", and 107 pounds. She may still go by the nicknames Neek or Nika. The day she disappeared, she had been on the phone with her mother, letting her know that she was going to go Christmas shopping. No one has seen or heard from her since. The night before she disappeared, she had stayed at the Sunset Motel, a motel known for sex work and drug abuse. Danica left behind her coat, purse, and cell phone in her room. Her mother was able to unlock her cell phone and discovered that she had been talking to a pimp and had been working in the sex industry. Danica is likely a victim of human trafficking. If you recognize her or know anything about this case, please contact the Federal Way Police Department. Kimberly Ann Forbes was last seen on October 30th, 2004 in Hood River, Oregon. She told her teenage daughter that she had plans to meet a friend the very next day for breakfast, followed by a trip to Portland to go shopping, but she had never arrived at that breakfast. 2 weeks later, her Ford Explorer was found abandoned in a parking lot in Gresham, Oregon. Police searched the vehicle and determined that it was abandoned on at least November 5th. Inside, they found food containers, women's clothing, and credit card receipts. Fingerprints inside the car not belonging to Kimberly were tested, and they found a match in the database. Police located the match, a Gresham man, and learned that he had broken into the car to steal from it. He cooperated the whole time and took a polygraph, which he passed, and police do not think he was a suspect in Kimberly's disappearance. Kimberly Ann Forbes would now be 64 years old. She's Caucasian, 5'8" and 200 pounds. She has brown-graying hair and blue eyes. Her friends and family strongly believe she had no mental health issues and would always say when she was leaving, there is a reward for information in this case. 25-year-old Camille Foss was murdered on October 17, 1975. She left her shift at the Sears at Washington Square Mall in Portland, Oregon at around 5 p.m. to make a bank deposit. The bank closed at around 6 p.m., so she had a short window to get there, but she never arrived. Hours later, a security guard discovered Camille's body slumped over in her car in the mall parking lot. She had a gunshot wound in her chest and another in her throat. She showed no signs of assault and appeared to have all of her belongings, indicating that it was not a robbery. Police believe the murder took place before sunset and that somebody must have witnessed something because of how visible her parking spot was. But no one has ever come forward and there has never been a suspect. Luckily, in late 2020, the DA received funding to go through old cold cases. This means we can retest evidence and hopefully find a lead. Please share to keep Camille's name out in the public. Anyone with information is urged to call the Washington County Sheriff's Office. The Disappearance of Sky Metawalla, Part 1. On November 6, 2011, Julia Metawalla called police around 10 a.m. to let them know her son was missing. Her story was bizarre. Around 8 a.m. that morning, Julia claims to have loaded her 4-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old son Sky into her brother's Acura. She planned to take them to a local hospital because her son was sick. As they made their way to the hospital, the car ran out of gas. She pulls off to the side of the road and makes the decision to leave her 2-year-old son in the back seat of the car in his car seat. Her and her daughter walk a mile to the nearest gas station. Rather than get gas because she has no money, she calls a friend who comes and picks her up. They go back to the car, and that's when she discovers Sky is gone. She then immediately calls police. A lot about her story is not adding up. Firstly, police realize there's at least 2 gallons of gas in the car, and there are no electrical issues. It was fine. That's when they started looking at Julia. Go to part 2. The disappearance of Sky Metawalla, part 2. The search for Sky was initiated immediately, but it was clear that police wanted to know more about the mother, Julia. As they dove deeper into Julia's past, their concerns were only validated. Julia struggled with mental disorders for quite a few years. After the birth of her first child, she was diagnosed with depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Her husband Solomon would have to leave work to make sure that the child was being fed because she didn't like germs. Medication helped a bit, but when she got pregnant with Sky, she took herself off the medication, which only made things worse. Solomon ended up filing for divorce and a nasty custody battle ensued. She claimed he was angry and abusive, and he claimed she couldn't care for them on her own because of her mental issues. Solomon lost custody while they investigated the allegations made against him. Julia had full custody. The pair ended up going to mediation to discuss custody and finally made an agreement. Julia would have custody and Solomon would have visitation. This was 2 days before Sky went missing. Go to part 3. The disappearance of Sky Metawalla, part 3. About a week after 2-year-old Sky went missing, police set up a roadblock where the Acura had been left. Their goal was to interview drivers who might take this path daily, and maybe somebody saw something. Several witnesses said they saw the Acura on the side of the road between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. What they didn't see was a child. They all had a clear view into the car window, and not a single person saw a child inside. Then we learned that only one person saw Sky in the last 2 weeks, and that was his mother, Julia. That means that he could have disappeared anywhere between the end of October and the beginning of November. Sky Metawalla has not been located. Today he would be 11 years old. He has black hair and brown eyes and is of Ukrainian and Pakistani descent. If you have any information, please contact the Bellevue Police Department in Washington. 425-577-5656. The disappearance of Cody Haynes, Part 1. On September 13th, 2004, Rick Haynes called Kittitas Police to report his 11-year-old son Cody as missing. Cody hadn't been seen since the night before when he was told to go to his room after not doing his chores. No one checked on Cody for 18 hours. His father claimed to be out gathering car parts for his job, and he didn't return to check on Cody until after 4 p.m. the next day, 14 hours. Once they finally checked on him, all they found were his toys and stuffed animals arranged in his bed to make it look like he was sleeping. One of his bags, some of his clothes, and several personal items were also missing. Police located his bag with his items outside near the shed where he kept his bike, but his bike was still there. Cody's parents, Rick and stepmother Marla, while willing to talk to police, refused to let them talk to Cody's 4 sisters. After learning that Cody was left alone without food or a bathroom break for 18 hours, police decided to have the girls taken away from them. Now was their opportunity to interview them, and what they learned made them even more suspicious of Cody's dad. The disappearance of Cody Haynes, Part 2. Once Cody's sisters were removed from the home, the police were able to interview them in the weeks after Cody's disappearance. What they learned was concerning to say the least. The night Cody went missing, he hadn't merely been sent to his room. He was allegedly brutally beaten by his father. He sustained a head injury and lost a lot of blood. Police also learned that at least 2 CPS calls claiming neglect and abuse were made prior to his disappearance, but both were investigated and deemed unfounded. With all of this information, police were able to get a search warrant. They intended to look at the apartment for blood as well as impound the van, the one Rick was driving when he was out looking for car parts. But they were discouraged when they found out the flooring in the kitchen had been changed. This was without the landlord's knowledge. In addition, they found out that the van had been sold for parts 2 days after Cody went missing. Despite the change in flooring, police did make a significant discovery in the apartment. We just don't know what that is. So they should be able to make an arrest, right? Go to Part 3. The disappearance of Cody Haynes, Part 3. Police were able to recover most of the van parts, but they didn't offer any new clues. They did confirm that Cody's dad, Rick, did drive 250 miles that night, but he never bought any car parts. All signs seemed to point to Rick Haynes having some involvement. In the months following the disappearance, he even tried to file a restraining order against the police chief. Unfortunately, even with all of this shady info, there was just not enough evidence. Rick Haynes was never arrested. He also never visited his 4 daughters in foster care, even though his rights to do so were never taken away. Nice guy, right? Rick Haynes died at the age of 57 in 2019, and we have no new clues and don't know what happened to Cody. He has been classified as a likely homicide victim. His family is still actively looking for answers. Cody Haynes has been gone for over 16 years and would be 28 years old today. He's Caucasian with brown hair, blue eyes, and has a birthmark on the inside of his right thigh.